Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we are stepping into a world that, at first glance, feels both familiar and utterly alien. A world of gas lamps and fog-choked streets, of bustling markets and hushed drawing rooms, but a world where the lines between medicine, vice and everyday life were drawn in a way you can barely imagine. You see, when you picture the Victorians, you probably think of starched collars and strict morality. You think of stoicism and self-restraint. And you'd be right about that to a degree. But behind the closed doors, in the quiet corners of every household, a different reality was taking hold. A reality where the medicine cabinet was less a cabinet and more a veritable apothecary of potent, unregulated substances. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking along a cobblestone street, the damp air thick with the smell of coal smoke and horse manure. Your head aches, a dull throb that's been there for days. Maybe your toddler is cutting a tooth, and their wails have kept you awake for nights. Maybe you've just received a letter with some devastating news, and your nerves are frayed to the point of snapping. There's a sign hanging above a small shop. Apothecary and chemist. You push open the door, the small bell above it jingling a welcome. You're not looking for a doctor, not really. You're looking for relief. And that relief came, more often than not, in a small brown bottle. This is the world of opium, the Victorian wonder drug. It was everywhere. It was in the hands of the poor, the rich, the sick, and the simply tired. It was sold openly, alongside your soap and your tea, often by the very same grocers. You could walk into a shop and buy a lump of raw opium for a few pence. No questions asked. The Victorians treated opium not as a dangerous narcotic, but as a benign and incredibly useful plant. They saw it the way we might see aspirin or ibuprofen, a simple, effective tool for managing pain and distress. This mainstream historical fact is crucial to understanding their mindset. They had no modern concept of addiction or dependency. The word addict itself, in the sense we use it today, didn't enter common parlance until much later. They spoke of a habit, a personal failing, a lack of willpower, but not a medical condition. The most common form of opium wasn't the raw lump, though. It was a tincture, a solution of opium dissolved in alcohol known as laudanum. This was the real cure-all. You could find it in every home, every pharmacy, and every corner store. It was the go-to remedy for everything: menstrual cramps, coughs, colds, diarrhea, toothaches, and even female complaints, like hysteria and melancholy. It was so ubiquitous that many people, especially working-class women, consumed it regularly, often without even knowing its true nature. They were simply taking the stuff for their aches, a common remedy passed down through generations. And it worked. Oh, it worked like a dream. The pain would melt away, the nerves would quiet, and a sense of blissful, peaceful serenity would settle over you. Who could blame them? In an age of pervasive sickness, poor sanitation, and relentless physical labour, it was a genuine escape. And this brings us to a quirky or fringe tidbit of the era: the rise of opium as a social lubricant. Forget cocktails and canapes. In some circles, laudanum was passed around at tea parties. Imagine a group of well-dressed ladies sipping their Earl Grey, while a decanter of dark, syrupy liquid sits on the table. A spoonful in your tea, a few drops on a sugar cube. It was considered a perfectly acceptable way to calm one's nerves before a stressful social event. It was seen as the mark of a sophisticated, modern individual, someone who understood the latest in chemical advancements. This was particularly true in artistic and literary circles, where opium was often seen as a key to unlocking creative genius. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, for example, famously attributed his visions for the poem Kubla Khan to an opium-fueled dream. The pervasive use of opium wasn't limited to England either. It was a global commodity, and the British Empire's role in its trade was a source of immense wealth, and eventually geopolitical conflict. Historians still argue whether the British government's promotion of opium trade in China was a calculated act of economic imperialism, or a more complex result of supply and demand, a cynical byproduct of the empire's insatiable thirst for tea and silver. The Opium Wars, fought between Britain and China in the mid-19th century, are a stark reminder of the drug's incredible economic and political power. It's a dark stain on the Victorian age's otherwise polished facade, a testament to how deeply interwoven the drug was with the very fabric of society. So, as you leave the apothecary with your small brown bottle, you feel a sense of hope. The label promises relief from pains and ache, and you trust it. Why wouldn't you? It's cheap, it's effective, and it's what everyone uses. You have no way of knowing that the relief it offers is temporary, or that its true nature is a cruel and binding one. You're not addicted. You're simply in need of comfort, and the Victorians, in their infinite wisdom, offered it to you in a dropper bottle. You make your way back through the darkening streets, the gaslight casting long, dancing shadows. You're holding not just a medicine, but a piece of your time, a small dose of oblivion that was the solution to 100 different problems, real and imagined. And you are, in a very real sense, a part of a quiet, chemical revolution, one that was happening in plain sight. You are back in your dimly lit drawing room, the small glass bottle of laudanum sitting on the mantelpiece, a promise of peace in a hectic, often painful world. The gaslight flickers, casting long dancing shadows that seem to stretch and shrink with every gust of wind outside. You uncork the bottle, and a rich, slightly medicinal and sweet scent fills the air. It's the smell of calm, the smell of sleep, and for the Victorians, it was the smell of everyday life. This unassuming little bottle was a staple in homes from the grimmiest tenement to the most lavish mansion. It was the original "there's a pill for that," except it wasn't a pill, it was a potent dark tincture, and it was the answer to an astonishing array of ailments, real and imagined. This widespread reliance on laudanum is a fundamental historical fact of the era. It was cheap, readily available, and a lot of the time it worked. Did your baby have colic? A few drops of Godfrey's cordial, a popular laudanum-based concoction, would quiet them down almost instantly. A toothache? Apply a little to the gum and the pain would melt away. A persistent cough? A spoonful of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, another laudanum product, would have you breathing easy in no time. It was a panacea, a cure-all, and its sheer ubiquity is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. You didn't need a prescription. You didn't even need a doctor. You could buy it at the grocer's, the chemist's, or even from a street vendor. The idea of regulated, controlled substances simply didn't exist in the way we understand it. It was a completely different world of medicine, and it was a world built on the back of the poppy. Now, here's a quirky tidbit you probably wouldn't expect. Laudanum wasn't just for physical pain, it was seen as a remedy for nerves. In a society where women were often confined to a domestic sphere and expected to maintain a placid, calm demeanour at all times, the pressures were immense. Hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis for everything from anxiety to fainting spells, was seen as a uniquely female affliction. And what was the go-to cure? You guessed it. A good stiff dose of laudanum. It was the original chill pill. A society that valued restraint and emotional control also provided an easy chemical shortcut to achieve it. A young woman overwhelmed by the demands of society, a mother exhausted from endless pregnancies and child-rearing, or a widow grieving her loss, all were handed a bottle of this liquid comfort. It's easy to imagine a nervous woman being told with a gentle, patronising tone, "Just take a little of this, dear. It will settle your nerves." And it would. For a little while. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of laudanum was a direct result of the lack of effective alternatives, or if it was also driven by a deeper social need for escape. Was it just about treating pain, or was it also about managing the immense stress and hardship of Victorian life? Think about it. Long working hours in factories, poor living conditions, and the constant threat of disease. A little bottle of laudanum was not just a medicine, it was a momentary respite, a short journey into a world where the aches of your body and the anxieties of your mind simply ceased to matter. For a few hours you could be free. It was a private luxury, a small secret kept in the top drawer of the dresser, or tucked away in a sewing box. The sheer normalcy of it all is what's so striking. You'd find recipes for laudanum in household medical guides, right alongside instructions for making poultices and herbal teas. It was part of the common accepted folk wisdom of the time. The dose for an adult was often listed in drops, 20 drops in water for a calming effect, 40 drops for severe pain. There was no one telling you that those drops were a gateway to physical and psychological dependency, and the consequences were often devastating. While many people used it sporadically and managed to avoid full-blown addiction, countless others did not. The stories of laudanum poisoning were common, whether accidental or intentional. A person might mistakenly take too much, or a parent, desperate for a quiet night, might give their child a dose far too large for their small body. The line between therapeutic use and a fatal overdose was terrifyingly thin. But for all its dangers, it's easy to see the appeal. Imagine a world without modern painkillers, without sleep aids, without anti-anxiety medication. A world where a simple cut could lead to a painful infection, where a toothache felt like a hammer blow, and where the death of a loved one was a regular expected part of life. In that world, a bottle of laudanum must have felt like a godsend. It was a tangible form of control over the one thing you couldn't always manage, your own suffering. The irony, of course, is that in seeking to control your pain, you were giving up a different kind of control entirely. You became a servant to the little brown bottle, always needing just a little more, always a little more. You would find yourself in a constant state of a mild, sleepy haze, your days blending together into a quiet, numb tapestry. And the cost? It was almost nothing. A bottle of laudanum was often cheaper than a bottle of gin, making it a drug of the masses. The working poor, who couldn't afford a doctor's visit, could always afford a few pennies for a dose of this miraculous cure-all. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The same substance that was used by romantic poets to fuel their creative visions was also used by factory workers to numb the grinding ache of their weary bodies after a 12-hour shift. This single substance bridged the vast social divide of Victorian England, a quiet chemical thread connecting the highest and lowest echelons of society. You probably won't survive this, and for many Victorians they didn't, at least not in the sense of a full unclouded life. Their reality was an opioid-tinted dream. You're a tourist in your own time, wandering through the labyrinthine streets of Victorian London. The pea-soup of fog, a mixture of coal smoke and river damp, clings to your clothes and stings your eyes. The air hums with the low roar of the city, a ceaseless cacophony of clip-clopping horses, street criers, and the faint melancholic song of a lone accordion. But you're not here for the usual sights. You've heard whispers, rumours of a different kind of place, a hidden world tucked away in the shadows of Limehouse and Chinatown, a place of exotic scents and silent dreaming figures. You're looking for an opium den. This is a mainstream historical fact that might surprise you. Opium dens, often romanticised and sensationalised, were a very real part of Victorian London's social landscape. They were a world away from the genteel drawing-room use of laudanum. These were places of escape and subculture, a deliberate choice to engage with the drug in a ritualised and communal setting. They were often run by Chinese immigrants, who had brought the tradition with them, and they offered a specific experience. You'd lie on a small bunk, use a long specialised pipe to inhale the smoky, sweet vapour of heated opium, and let the world outside simply fade away. For the Victorians who frequented them, it was a journey to an alien land without ever leaving the city. The dens were portrayed in popular fiction and journalistic accounts as places of exotic sin and moral decay, but for many they were simply quiet refuges. The aesthetic of these places was a part of the allure. Forget the stuffy parlours and soot-stained brick. Inside you'd find low-slung beds, decorated screens, and the heavy sweet scent of opium mixed with incense. It was an environment designed to transport you, to disengage you from the dreary reality of your daily life. This was the fringe tidbit of the era, the romanticisation of the opium den. While laudanum was seen as a practical domestic remedy, the opium dens were seen as a much more bohemian, even artistic indulgence. Writers, artists and journalists would venture into these places, seeking a dose of the exotic and the forbidden. They came to observe, to get a taste of Oriental culture, and often to get high. They wrote about it with a mix of fear and fascination, creating a mythology around these dens that persist even today. Sherlock Holmes, for example, famously frequented an opium den in The Man with the Twisted Lip, not as an addict, but as a detective on the trail of a case. This portrayal cemented the dens in the public imagination as places of mystery and intrigue. Historians still argue whether the opium dens were primarily a source of social and moral decay, or if they were a more benign and misunderstood part of a multicultural city. For the Chinese immigrants who ran them, they were often simply a business, a way to make a living in a foreign, often hostile land. For the patrons, they were a private indulgence, but the popular press, with its lurid accounts of dens of iniquity, certainly leaned toward the former. The dens became a symbol of a deeper anxiety about the loss of British moral rectitude and the corrupting influence of foreign cultures. You push open a heavy, unassuming door and step inside. The air is warm and thick, almost chewy with smoke and the unique scent of opium. The silence is profound, broken only by the gentle burble of a water pipe and the occasional soft sigh. You see figures lying on small couches or bunks, eyes closed, faces slack with an expression of deep, dreamless contentment. They are from all walks of life. A dishevelled sailor with a faded tattoo on his arm, a pale, consumptive-looking clerk in a rumpled suit. Maybe even a society lady, her face partially obscured by a veil, seeking anonymity and oblivion in equal measure. There's a subtle, almost reverent atmosphere, like being in a silent church, but one devoted to the god of peaceful numbness. The experience of smoking opium was different from drinking laudanum. While laudanum provided a steady, long-lasting quietude, opium smoking offered a more intense, immediate high. The effects would hit you quickly, and the dream was often more vivid and more profound. It was a more deliberate and conscious act of escape, a ritual that required a specific kind of pipe, a small lamp, and a certain technique. It was less of a casual remedy and more of a dedicated pastime, and with that the addiction could be even more powerful. The ritual itself became a part of the habit, a psychological anchor to the physical need. You didn't just crave the drug, you craved the act of preparing it, the gentle heat of the flame, the slow rhythmic pull on the pipe, the sweet cloying taste on your tongue. Of course, the popular image was far grimmer. Newspapers gleefully reported on ruined lives and opium fiends, creating a stereotype of the hopeless, hollowed-out addict. You might hear a joke whispered in a pub about a man who spent his wife's inheritance on a pipe dream, but the reality was far more tragic. You could easily lose your job, your family, and your standing in society. It was a quiet, almost secret ruin, a gradual decay of the self that happened behind closed doors in the shadows of the city's underbelly. And yet, for the desperate, the lonely, and the creatively starved, the promise of the opium den was too powerful to resist. It was a place where you could simply be, where the relentless pressure of Victorian life could be muted to a dull, manageable hum. You can almost feel the pull of it, the siren song of absolute stillness. You imagine yourself lying there, the smoke filling your lungs, and for the first time in your life, not a single worry or thought enters your mind. The world outside, with its rigid rules and crushing expectations, vanishes. It's just you, the warm, gentle numbness, and a silent, shared dream with the strangers around you. You probably won't survive this journey, and in a way, those who entered those dens didn't either. They left a part of themselves behind, a small sliver of their waking life, and in exchange, they got a few hours of blissful, dream-filled oblivion. The opium dens were a microcosm of a larger societal trend, the search for chemical salvation in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. The Victorian era, you see, was not a static, sleepy time. It was an age of furious innovation and dizzying change. The world was shrinking with the advent of steamships and telegraphs, and new discoveries were being made at a rapid-fire pace. Among these discoveries was a white, crystalline powder that would, for a time, be hailed as a miracle. Its name was cocaine, and its introduction into the medical and commercial world was a fascinating and deeply unregulated affair. It represents a significant departure from the well-established poppy-derived drugs and the start of a new, more potent chapter in the chemical history of the age. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Cocaine was not viewed as a dangerous narcotic initially. It was seen as a revolutionary anesthetic and a powerful stimulant with a seemingly endless list of applications. Isolated from the coca plant in the 1850s, it first gained widespread attention in the 1880s thanks to the work of a young Sigmund Freud. He enthusiastically promoted its use as a treatment for everything from depression and digestive disorders to morphine addiction itself. He called it a magical drug and a glorious intoxicant. This enthusiasm, from a leading intellectual of the day, gave cocaine an air of scientific legitimacy and respectability. It wasn't a back-alley drug, it was the cutting edge of medicine, and so it found its way into the wild, unregulated world of patent medicines. This is the quirky or fringe tidbit of this section. Patent medicines were concoctions sold to the public with grandiose claims and often secret ingredients. They were the original snake oil, but some of them, like Dr. Miles' Restorative Nervine or Vin Mariani, were not just harmless placebos. Vin Mariani, for example, was a French tonic wine that was marketed as a cure for fatigue and a mental pick-me-up. It was endorsed by everyone from Pope Leo XIII to Thomas Edison. Its secret ingredient? A hefty dose of cocaine-infused coca leaves. You could buy it at any chemist or grocer, a respectable, well-marketed product, promising to banish your weariness and restore your vigour. A modern aside, imagine buying a bottle of Nervin from your local CVS, and its main active ingredient is a powerful stimulant. The thought is both absurd and, for the Victorians, completely normal. Historians still argue whether the patent medicine craze was more a reflection of public gullibility or a cynical exploitation of the era's lack of regulatory oversight. It was likely a bit of both. The public was desperate for cures in a time of widespread disease and limited medical knowledge, and the manufacturers were more than happy to provide them, promising to cure everything from female weaknesses to consumption, tuberculosis. The lack of any labelling laws meant that these bottles could contain whatever the manufacturer wanted, and often that included a cocktail of highly addictive substances. You might be taking a cough syrup that contained heroin and a tonic that contained cocaine, all without ever knowing it. Imagine you're feeling a bit run down. A friend recommends a bottle of cocaine toothache drops for that nagging molar. The label is bright and reassuring. It promises instant relief. You dab a few drops on your gum and the pain is gone, replaced by a pleasant tingling sensation and a newfound energy. You think, this is amazing. The feeling is so much better than the dull, sleepy haze of laudanum. It's a clean, invigorating buzz. It makes you feel alert, alive, and capable. You start to take a few drops in the morning with your tea just to get a good start to the day. You're not addicted, of course. You're just restored. The Victorians simply didn't have the framework to understand that the feeling of restoration was a pharmacological high, and the subsequent crash was a sign of a burgeoning dependency. The culture around these medicines was incredibly pervasive. Newspaper and magazine advertisements were everywhere, featuring testimonials from satisfied customers and often using florid, exaggerated language. They promised a swift and permanent cure. The lack of accountability was total. A manufacturer could sell a bottle of sweetened water with a dash of cocaine and call it a brain tonic, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The Victorian public, so often associated with a sceptical, pragmatic mindset, was surprisingly trusting when it came to the promises of these quack remedies. It speaks to a deep-seated desire for quick fixes and the genuine pain and suffering that pervaded daily life. The contrast between the opium user and the cocaine user is a telling one. While the opium user sought oblivion and escape, the cocaine user sought energy and empowerment. Opium was for quiet introspection and peaceful dreams. Cocaine was for the hustle of modern life, for late-night work, for creativity on demand. It was the drug for the ambitious, the drug for the man or woman on the move, and it was just as dangerous, if not more so. The stimulation was followed by an inevitable crash, leading to a need for more of the drug to feel normal again. This cycle of use and withdrawal was a new kind of hell, a manic, paranoid reality that was a stark contrast to the sleepy world of laudanum. You probably won't survive this journey, and in this part of it, you see why. You've gone from a world of quiet, numbing peace to one of frantic, jittery energy. You've moved from the shadowy world of the opium den to the bright, respectable world of the chemist shop. But the end result is the same. A powerful dependency, a quiet erosion of your will, and a life slowly being taken over by a substance you once believed was a miracle cure. The rise of cocaine in patent medicines is a perfect microcosm of the Victorian era itself. A time of immense progress and newfound knowledge, but also one of profound naivete and unforeseen consequences. The Victorian era, as you've seen, was a time of powerful discoveries, but not all of them were embraced by the public in the same way. While laudanum was a household staple and cocaine a thrilling new tonic, there was another opium derivative that was slowly and methodically changing the face of medicine. This was morphine, a far more potent and refined alkaloid of the opium poppy. Its story is less about the backstreet grocer and more about the white-coated physician. This is a mainstream historical fact that completely altered medicine. Morphine was first isolated in the early 19th century, but it wasn't until the mid-1800s that its true potential was realised. As a pure compound, It was a more reliable and quantifiable drug than the messy, alcohol-based laudanum. A doctor could prescribe an exact dose of morphine, and a pharmacist could dispense it with a level of precision that was simply impossible with a liquid tincture. This newfound predictability made it the perfect tool for the emerging field of modern medicine. It became the go-to for pain management in hospitals and private practice. A soldier wounded in the Crimean War, a woman giving birth, a patient recovering from a major surgery, all were given morphine to manage their pain. It was a revolutionary leap forward from the days of simply gritting your teeth and bearing it. The development of morphine as a medical tool was a source of immense pride and progress. For the first time, doctors had a powerful, reliable analgesic that could be administered with a high degree of control. It was considered a humane and compassionate way to treat suffering. And so, a new kind of quiet, clinical addiction began to emerge. Unlike the working-class laudanum user, the morphine addict was often a patient, someone who'd been given the drug legitimately by a trusted physician. The addiction was often a tragic side effect of an otherwise successful medical treatment. Historians still argue whether the medical community's initial blindness to morphine's addictive potential was due to genuine ignorance or a willful neglect in the face of such a powerful and useful drug. They saw the benefits so clearly that the drawbacks were either dismissed or simply not yet understood. Here's the quirky tidbit that connects the dots between a medical breakthrough and a social trend: the rise of the respectable addict. Morphine addiction was often referred to as the soldier's disease because of its prevalence among veterans who had been treated for their battlefield injuries. Unlike the opium den user, who was seen as a moral degenerate, the morphine user was often pitied as a victim of circumstance. They had not sought out the drug for recreation, but had been given it by a doctor, a man of science and authority. This created a profound social dichotomy. One kind of addiction was a sign of moral failure, the other was a tragic illness. This difference in perception is a fascinating glimpse into the Victorian psyche. They loved a good moral narrative, and a story of a tragic war hero struggling with a medical dependency was much more palatable than a story of a working-class person seeking oblivion. You are a respected member of society, a well-to-do person who, through some unfortunate illness or accident, has found yourself in the care of a physician. He comes to your home, a small black bag in his hand. You have been in agony for days, the pain so intense that it has clouded your mind and made you weak. He reaches into his bag and produces a small vial and a fine, slender needle. You're wary of the needle, of course, but you're also desperate. He reassures you that this is the latest in modern medicine, a pure extract that will relieve your suffering with a precision that old laudanum simply cannot. You nod, too tired to argue, and he administers the dose. A wave of peaceful warmth spreads through your body, and the pain recedes to a dull, manageable ache. You finally sleep. You probably won't survive this experience without a new kind of dependency, and this is where the irony really bites. The very tool that was designed to save you and heal you also binds you in a quiet, clinical way. The next day, when the pain returns, you call for the doctor again. He comes, and he gives you another dose. The days turn into weeks, and the weeks turn into months. Soon, you're not just taking the drug for pain, you're taking it to prevent the withdrawal symptoms. You feel a new kind of sickness, a cold sweat and a tremor that only the doctor's visit can cure. You are a respectable person, and this is a respectable addiction. Your family, your friends, they all believe you are simply suffering from a chronic illness that requires a regular medical attention. And in a way, you are. The rise of morphine also marked a shift in the way drugs were administered. While laudanum was a tincture to be drunk, morphine was a compound to be injected. The hypodermic syringe, invented in the mid-19th century, was a game-changer. It allowed for the direct and immediate delivery of the drug into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system and offering a far more powerful and instantaneous effect. This also, of course, made the drug far more addictive. The syringe became a symbol of modern medicine, and of the growing divide between the old world of tonics and potions and the new world of precise, powerful drugs. It was clean, it was scientific, and it was devastatingly effective. In many ways, morphine was the stepping stone from the haphazard drug use of the early Victorian era to the more controlled but no less dangerous practices of the late century. It was a product of the scientific method, of a desire for order and precision. And in that search for order, they created a new kind of chaos, a new kind of servitude. The ghost of morphine addiction would haunt the medical community for decades to come, a silent, powerful reminder that every new discovery has a dark side, a price to be paid. You're now standing on the precipice of that new world, a world where the line between healing and harming is blurrier than ever. You're a fly on the wall in a Victorian doctor's office, the air smelling of antiseptic and dust. The doctor, a serious-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard, is holding a fascinating new tool, a glass and metal tube with a sharp, hollow needle on the end. This is the hypodermic syringe, and its arrival in the mid-19th century was nothing short of a revolution. Before this, medicine was largely about ingestion, swallowing tonics, sipping elixirs, or taking powders. The syringe changed all that, allowing for the direct and immediate delivery of substances into the body. It was a leap forward in medical technology, and it created a whole new kind of dependency. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era, the invention and widespread adoption of the hypodermic syringe. While a prototype was developed earlier, it was the independent work of two physicians in the 1850s, Charles Gabriel Prevas and Alexander Wood, that truly perfected it. Wood in particular was an advocate for its use in administering morphine, believing it to be a more effective and less habit-forming method than oral ingestion. The reasoning was sound, if tragically mistaken. He thought that by bypassing the stomach, you would avoid the gastric irritation that he believed led to addiction. He was, of course, completely wrong. The syringe simply delivered the drug faster and with more potency, creating a more powerful and immediate high, and therefore a more powerful and immediate addiction. The use of the syringe for medical purposes, particularly for morphine, became incredibly common. It was seen as a sign of progress, a clean and scientific method for treating pain. A soldier on a battlefield, a woman in the throes of labour. These were the new patients of this new technology. The morphine syringe became a staple of medical kits, a symbol of the doctor's ability to offer swift and decisive relief from suffering. The irony, of course, is that this tool, designed for healing, became an instrument of silent, clinical ruin for countless people. The addiction that resulted was a quiet one, a personal secret kept in the privacy of one's home. You probably won't survive this new level of intensity. Here's the quirky or fringe tidbit. The hypodermic syringe, in the hands of the addicted, became a tool for a new kind of needlework, a ritual as personal and private as a woman's embroidery. The addict would have their own syringe, a carefully guarded possession. The ritual of preparing the dose, the careful measuring of the powder, the mixing with a drop of water, the slow draw into the glass tube, the quiet moment of administering the shot, was as much a part of the experience as the drug itself. This was a world away from the convivial, smoky atmosphere of the opium den. This was a solitary, methodical act, a secret shame. It was a new modern form of self-medication, a one-to-one relationship between a person and their drug of choice. Historians still argue whether the medical community, in its rush to embrace new technology, was culpable in the subsequent rise of drug addiction. Were they genuinely ignorant of the dangers, or did they simply turn a blind eye to them in the face of a powerful and effective tool? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. They were a product of their time, a time that placed immense faith in science and progress. They believed that by isolating the active principle of a plant and administering it in a controlled way, they could harness its benefits while avoiding its drawbacks. They were wrong, and the consequences were profound. Imagine yourself a wealthy gentleman, a man of standing and reputation. You suffered a terrible bout of rheumatism, and your doctor, a man of science, prescribed regular injections of morphine to manage the pain. The relief was instantaneous, and you were able to return to your daily life. But as the months went on, you found yourself needing the injections not just for the pain, but to feel normal. The doctor's visits became more frequent, and then you learned to do it yourself. You had your own syringe kit, a beautiful polished wooden box that you kept locked away. It was your secret, your quiet burden. Your friends and family would comment on your frailty, on your need for regular treatments, but they had no idea of the quiet ritual that took place behind your closed bedroom door. The spread of the hypodermic syringe coincided with the rise of the Victorian middle class, who could afford a doctor's services and these new, expensive tools. This created a new kind of addict, the respectable, well-to-do person who was quietly wasting away. They were not the subjects of moralistic newspaper articles. They were the unfortunate victims of medical progress. They were the ones who had the soldier's disease or the lady's malady. The addiction was not a moral failing, but a physical one, a tragic consequence of a medical treatment. This created a strange societal paradox. You could be both a pillar of your community and a slave to a powerful drug, all at the same time. The social stigma of addiction, while present for the opium smoker, was much less for the morphine injector, who could cloak their dependency in a veil of medical necessity. The hypodermic syringe also created a new kind of drug culture. It was no longer about a leisurely communal smoke in a den or a social sip of a tonic wine. It was about the solitary, powerful and instantaneous high. The very act of injection provided a rush that ingestion couldn't. It was the difference between a slow burn and a flash fire, and for the addict it created a new kind of psychological and physical need. The ritual became an essential part of their day, a secret act of self-soothing that spiraled into a life-consuming necessity. You are now a part of this new world, a world where a small, elegant tool could promise so much and take so much more in return. The syringe, you see, was the perfect symbol of the Victorian era, a beautiful, clean, and terrifyingly efficient tool of progress. You're a modern-day detective looking through a catalogue from a bygone era, and the products on offer are both astonishing and a little terrifying. The pages are filled with advertisements for things like Dr. Williams's pink pills for pale people, Radway's Ready Relief, and Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound. These aren't products from a shadowy illegal market. They are the ubiquitous patent medicines that define the Victorian approach to health and wellness. They were the most common form of medicine for the majority of the population, a true reflection of a time when the consumer was largely on their own. This is a key mainstream historical fact. The Victorian era was the golden age of the unregulated patent medicine industry. There was little to no government oversight on what manufacturers could put in their bottles or what claims they could make on the label. As a result, the market was flooded with concoctions that promised to cure everything under the sun, from a simple cold to life-threatening diseases like consumption. These medicines were sold by travelling salesmen in pharmacies and even in grocery stores. They were advertised in every newspaper and magazine with florid language and glowing testimonials. They were, in essence, the original snake oil, but with a twist. They often contained highly potent and addictive substances, and this is the quirky or fringe tidbit, the surprising potency of these so-called remedies. Many of these elixirs were, in fact, incredibly effective at what they promised to do, make you feel better, at least temporarily. Why? Because they were often laced with significant amounts of opium, morphine, cocaine, or alcohol. Dr. Kilmer's swamp root, for example, was a popular kidney remedy that contained a high percentage of alcohol, while Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, meant for infants, contained a small but very effective dose of morphine. A person suffering from chronic pain, a cough, or just general malaise would take one of these tonics and feel a rapid and powerful sense of relief, not realizing they were consuming a powerful and addictive drug. Historians still argue whether the manufacturers of these patent medicines were cynical charlatans or simply opportunistic businessmen taking advantage of a loophole in the law. It's a complex debate. On the one hand, they knew they were selling powerful drugs without any proper medical guidance. On the other, they were simply giving the public what it wanted, a quick, cheap and effective fix for their ailments. They were, in a way, filling a void left by a medical establishment that was often expensive and by modern standards not very effective. In a time of widespread sickness and limited medical options, a bottle of Dr. Jones's miracle cure that actually made you feel better, even for a little while, was an easy sell. Imagine you are a working-class mother, constantly in a state of exhaustion. Your children have persistent coughs, and your husband is laid up with a bad case of fever. You can't afford a doctor, but you can afford a few shillings for a bottle of the great remedy. The label promises to soothe all pains and bring great comfort. You give a spoonful to your children, and they finally stop their wheezing. You take a dose yourself, and you feel the tension in your shoulders melt away. You don't know that the great comfort you're feeling is the soothing effect of opium. You just know that it works, and you keep a bottle on hand at all times, a small, quiet secret that makes life just a little bit more bearable. The sheer volume of these products on the market is staggering. A single newspaper from the era might contain dozens of advertisements for different elixirs and tonics, each one promising a different miracle. They often featured pictures of happy, healthy-looking families, giving the impression that their product was a safe and wholesome part of a healthy life. The language was flowery and reassuring, full of words like, pure, natural, and harmless. You probably won't survive this journey without realizing that this lack of regulation was a truly dangerous thing. The absence of a governing body to ensure public safety meant that the most powerful drugs could be sold under the guise of a harmless home remedy. The trust that the public placed in these products was a testament to their desperation and a tragic indictment of the era's lack of consumer protection. The patent medicine craze also had a significant social impact. It blurred the lines between medicine and commerce, creating a culture where a medical solution could be bought off a shelf without any need for a doctor's diagnosis. This empowered the consumer, but it also put them at incredible risk. The addiction that resulted from these products was often a slow, creeping process. You didn't become a drug addict overnight. You simply kept taking your tonic or your soothing syrup because it made you feel better. Over time, your body would become dependent on the substance, and you would find yourself trapped in a cycle of use and withdrawal, a prisoner to a bottle you once believed was your salvation. This was the quiet, chemical revolution happening in every home in England. And what about the ingredients? The manufacturers of these medicines guarded their formulas with a zeal that rivaled any modern corporation. A single bottle might contain a mixture of alcohol, opium, cocaine, cannabis, and even things like chloroform. There was no standardized dosage, no warning labels, and no way for a consumer to know what they were truly putting into their body. This was a free-for-all, a wild west of pharmacology, and the consequences were often tragic. The long-term effects of these drugs were simply not known, and the public was a guinea pig in a grand, uncontrolled experiment. This part of the journey is a sobering reminder that sometimes a lack of rules is more dangerous than an overabundance of them. You're standing in a Victorian pharmacy, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and sweet tinctures. A young mother is at the counter, her voice a low, worried whisper as she describes her child's persistent, hacking cough. The pharmacist, a man in a crisp white coat, nods sagely and reaches for a small dark glass bottle. The label reads, Doctor, Godfrey's Cordial, a most soothing remedy for infants. This isn't a patent medicine for adults. This is a product specifically designed for children. And its secrets, you will soon discover, are both shocking and utterly commonplace for the time. This is a powerful mainstream historical fact. Victorian cough syrups and other child remedies were often potent narcotics. They were seen as a perfectly acceptable way to manage the various ailments of childhood, from a simple cold to teething pain. In an era with high infant mortality and limited understanding of disease, a quiet child was a healthy child and a calm sleeping baby was a relief to an exhausted parent. These remedies promised just that: peace and quiet. The most common active ingredient was opium in one of its forms, often morphine, because it was incredibly effective at suppressing a cough and inducing sleep. The bottles often had bright, cheerful labels, and the syrups themselves were sweetened with sugar or treacle to make them more palatable for children. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the cultural acceptance of this practice. It was so normal that it was simply part of the fabric of daily life. A mother might give a few drops of Godfrey's Cordial to her fussing infant without a second thought, seeing it no differently than we might give a child a dose of children's ibuprofen. They were not malicious parents trying to drug their kids. They were loving parents trying to bring them comfort in a time of suffering. There was a sense of shared community knowledge, passed down from mother to mother, that the stuff would quiet the child and allow everyone in the house to get some much-needed rest. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of these narcotics on children was a result of a deep and tragic ignorance, or if it was also a reflection of the profound despair that many working-class families faced. Was it about a lack of medical knowledge, or was it also about the sheer exhaustion of parents who worked long hours and had no relief from the demands of child-rearing? It's a complex and heartbreaking question. The reality is that the lines were blurred. The ignorance of the danger was certainly a factor, but so was the grim reality of life in a world without modern amenities or social safety nets. You're a small child in this era. You have a terrible cough, the kind that makes your chest ache and your body feel weak. Your mother brings you a spoonful of a sweet, dark syrup. You don't know what it is, only that it tastes good, and soon after you swallow it, the cough recedes. Your eyelids feel heavy, and a pleasant, dreamy warmth spreads through you. You fall asleep easily, and when you wake, you feel a little better. You don't know that your small, growing body is already beginning to form a habit. You don't know that the relief is not a cure, but a temporary reprieve. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of immense sadness for these children, who were innocently given powerful drugs by the very people who loved them most. The consequences of this practice were often dire. The dosages were often imprecise, and an overdose, accidental or otherwise, was a tragically common occurrence. A parent might misread the label, or a child might get hold of the bottle and take too much. The lack of warning labels and the lack of standardization meant that a dose that was safe for one child might be fatal for another. Infant mortality was already high, and these soothing syrups added a quiet, insidious layer to the tragedy. The addiction that resulted was also a silent horror. A child might become irritable and withdrawn when they weren't given their daily dose, and a parent would see this as a return of the illness, not a sign of dependency. And so, the cycle would continue. The advertisements for these products were often incredibly manipulative, featuring serene images of sleeping infants and smiling mothers. They played on a parent's natural desire to protect and comfort their child. A newspaper ad might show a desperate weeping mother, followed by a picture of the same woman smiling, her child now soundly asleep thanks to the miracle elixir. This kind of marketing was a powerful force, and it normalized a practice that we would find horrifying today. It made the use of narcotics on children a respectable, even laudable act. As you reflect on this, you see the profound difference between the Victorian mindset and our own. We have a highly regulated system for children's medicine, with clear warnings and precise dosages. The Victorians operated in a world of hope and trust, believing that a product sold openly must be safe. It was a world that, in its simplicity, was incredibly dangerous. The soothing syrups were not a dark, hidden secret. They were a part of the open, public conversation about health and family. They were a testament to the fact that good intentions, combined with a lack of knowledge and regulation, can lead to truly tragic outcomes. You are now leaving the world of adult addiction and entering a world where even the most vulnerable members of society were not safe from the unintended consequences of the age of chemical progress. You're a modern-day observer in a Victorian doctor's waiting room, listening to the soft rustle of starched skirts and the low hum of conversation. A woman, pale and with a nervous tremor in her hands, is speaking to the physician in hushed tones. Her diagnosis, a common one for the time, is hysteria. This was not a rare condition. It was a catch-all term for everything from anxiety and depression to fainting spells and emotional distress. It was seen as a distinctly female affliction, a product of a woman's fragile constitution. The Victorians, ever keen on a chemical solution, had their remedies for this as well, moving beyond laudanum and into a new class of sedatives. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Bromides, specifically potassium bromide, were the first widely used sedatives for treating nervous conditions. First used medically in the 1850s, they quickly became a staple in the Victorian physician's arsenal. They were sold in pharmacies, often without a prescription, and were found in a variety of patent medicines with names like Nervine, Brain and Nerve Food, and Dr. Miles' Restorative Nervine. These products promised to calm the nerves and soothe the brain, and they did. Bromides had a powerful, if slow-acting, sedative effect. A person suffering from a panic attack or a bout of anxiety would take a dose and feel a quiet sense of calm settle over them, a gentle numbing of their frayed nerves. The use of bromides for hysteria is a fascinating glimpse into the Victorian understanding of mental health. They didn't see it as a psychological condition in the way we do today. They saw it as a physiological one, a problem with the nervous system that could be fixed with a chemical. This is where the quirky or fringe tidbit comes in. The diagnosis of hysteria was not just a medical one, it was a social one. A woman who was too emotional, too strong-willed, or too outspoken might be labelled as hysterical and prescribed a bromide to calm her down. It was a form of social control, a way to pathologise female dissent and a way to encourage conformity. A joke in the era might have been about a husband giving his wife nerve drops to keep her from getting too emotional about the household budget. Historians still argue whether the medical community's treatment of hysteria was a genuine attempt to alleviate suffering or a patriarchal tool to enforce social norms. It's a complex and layered debate. The reality is likely a mix of both. The physicians were treating a real problem. Anxiety and depression were rampant in the era, but they were also doing so within a social framework that saw female emotionality as a flaw that needed to be medicated. They were trying to help, but in doing so, they were often simply reinforcing the societal expectations of the time. As the century wore on, a new class of sedatives, the barbiturates, began to emerge. The first of these, barbital, was synthesized in the early 1900s, but it was the precursor to the long line of sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medications that would follow. While they are technically post-Victorian, the groundwork for their use was laid in this era. The Victorians were constantly seeking a new, more effective way to calm the nerves and induce sleep, and the development of these new drugs was a direct result of that demand. The use of bromides created a market and a cultural acceptance for chemical sedation that paved the way for the barbiturates that would follow. Imagine you are a woman in a long-sleeved dress, your corset tight around your waist. You're expected to be the perfect hostess, a calming presence in the household. But inside, your mind is racing, your heart is pounding, and you feel a sense of dread that you can't explain. A friend recommends a tonic, a special elixir that promises to calm you. You take a dose, and soon you feel a welcome sense of detachment. The world around you seems to slow down. You can still function, you can still talk to your guests, but the manic energy that was bubbling under the surface has been replaced by a quiet, manageable hum. You probably won't survive this journey without a newfound appreciation for the quiet, insidious way these drugs take hold. The problem with bromides, as was later discovered, was that they were not just addictive, they were toxic. Chronic use led to a condition called bromism, which could cause a range of symptoms, from a skin rash and slurred speech to hallucinations and psychosis. The very drug that was supposed to calm the mind could in fact cause a profound mental illness. But because the symptoms were so slow to develop, a doctor might simply prescribe a higher dose, believing the patient's condition was worsening, not realizing they were the ones poisoning them. The reliance on chemical solutions for mental and emotional distress is a powerful through line in the Victorian era. From the use of opium for melancholy to the use of bromides for hysteria, the Victorians were always looking for a quick fix in a bottle. They believed in the power of chemistry to solve problems of the mind and the body. And while this belief led to some incredible medical breakthroughs, it also led to a lot of unintended consequences. The quiet, respectable use of these sedatives created a new kind of dependency, a new kind of silent suffering. It was a kind of addiction that was hidden in plain sight, a disease masquerading as a cure. The Victorian obsession with tranquility and emotional control led them down a path that was paved with good intentions and lined with bottles of chemical comfort, each one a little more dangerous than the last. You have now seen how the quest for a quiet mind led to a new kind of chemical servitude. You're a flaneur in Belle Epoque Paris, not a Londoner this time, and the air is different here. It's filled with the scent of coffee, cigarette smoke, and a certain kind of bohemian decay. The cafes are bustling, and the artists and writers are in a fever of creativity, fueled by a drink that has a reputation as a muse and a madness. It's a bright, startling green liquid, served in a special glass with a slotted spoon and a sugar cube. This is absinthe, and its story is less about medicine and more about art, poetry, and the alluring promise of a different kind of high. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Absinthe was not a medicinal drug in the same vein as opium or cocaine, but a high-proof spirit with a powerful cultural mystique. Distilled from botanicals including wormwood, fennel, and anise, it became incredibly popular in France in the mid-19th century and spread across Europe. It was the drink of the working class and the intellectual elite alike, a symbol of rebellion and artistic freedom. The ritual of preparation, the slow drip of cold water over a sugar cube melting into the green liquid, was as much a part of the experience as the drink itself. It was a potent spirit, often over 70% alcohol by volume, and the alcohol content alone was enough to produce a powerful state of intoxication. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the legend of the Green Fairy. Absinthe was believed to be more than just a drink. It was said to cause hallucinations and a state of lucid madness. The culprit, so it was believed, was a chemical compound in wormwood called thujon. The belief was that thujon acted on the brain in a way that was similar to cannabis, producing a trippy effect that was different from simple drunkenness. This belief was enthusiastically embraced by artists like Van Gogh and Toulouse-Lautrec, who saw it as a key to unlocking their creative potential. The drink became synonymous with a kind of inspired, tortured genius, a dangerous but necessary vice for those who lived on the edge of society. Historians still argue whether the Green Fairy's hallucinogenic effects were real or a product of myth, and the sheer volume of alcohol being consumed. Modern science tells us that the thujone content in most absinthe was too low to cause the kind of effects attributed to it. It was likely a combination of the potent alcohol, the presence of other botanicals, and the romantic, self-fulfilling belief of the drinkers. The Victorian mind was so ready to believe in the power of a substance to alter reality that they willed the hallucinations into being. The story of absinthe is a powerful lesson in the role of psychology in the drug experience. Imagine you're an aspiring poet, sitting at a table in a Parisian cafe. The air is thick with smoke and the chatter of 100 voices. You feel blocked, unable to write a single line. A friend pushes a glass of absinthe toward you. "Drink it," he says. "The fairy will visit you. She'll tell you what to write." You're sceptical, but you perform the ritual, the dripping water, the dissolving sugar, and take a sip. The liquid is strong and tastes of licorice and herbs. You take another sip and then another. Soon the world around you seems to sharpen. Colours become more vivid, and the cafe lights seem to sparkle. You feel a sudden rush of ideas, a cascade of words and images. You pull out a notebook and begin to write, the words flowing freely as if from another source. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the incredible power of suggestion. The madness of absinthe, which was so celebrated by artists, was more often than not a simple case of alcohol poisoning. The high-proof spirit could lead to blackouts, aggressive behaviour, and in chronic users a general deterioration of health. It also became a scapegoat for societal problems. The French wine industry, threatened by absinthe's popularity, launched a vicious public relations campaign against it, blaming it for everything from crime and social decay to physical and mental illness. The absinthe fiend became a caricature in the press, a pale, twitching figure of moral ruin. The public, already wary of the bohemian lifestyle associated with the drink, was quick to believe the sensationalized stories. The absinthe craze came to a quiet end in the early 20th century, when a number of countries, led by Switzerland and France, banned the spirit outright. The bans were not based on hard science, but on the social panic and moral outrage that had been building for decades. Absinthe became a forbidden fruit, a secret pleasure that could only be obtained through the black market. The ban effectively killed its cultural relevance for a century, but the legend of the Green Fairy lived on. The story of absinthe in the Victorian era is a powerful counterpoint to the more clinical narratives of opium and morphine. It shows that drugs don't exist in a vacuum. Their meaning and their effects are shaped by culture, art, and moral panic. Absinthe was not a medicine or a remedy. It was a symbol, a key to a world of creativity and rebellion that many people desperately wanted to believe existed. It was the drug of the romantic, the artistic, and the lost. And for a time, it cast a long green shadow over the entire European cultural scene. You've now seen how the search for a chemical escape wasn't just about pain and suffering, but also about the eternal human quest for inspiration and a different kind of reality. You're a guest at a fashionable Victorian dinner party, the room warm and bright with the glow of gaslight. The conversation is lively, a low murmur of gossip and politics. Suddenly, a small commotion erupts in the corner of the room. A woman has fainted, and a man with a look of concern pulls a small vial from his coat pocket. He uncorks it, and a strange, sweet, almost sickly smell fills the air. It's a distinct and recognisable scent, a scent that for a time was a symbol of both profound medical progress and an odd, dangerous pastime. It is the scent of chloroform. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Chloroform was a revolutionary anaesthetic that completely changed the landscape of medicine and surgery. Discovered in the 1830s, its use was popularised in the 1840s by Scottish physician James Young Simpson, who was searching for a more effective and safer alternative to ether. The moment that truly cemented its place in history was in 1853, when Queen Victoria herself was administered chloroform to ease the pain of childbirth. The Queen's chloroform made its use not just medically acceptable, but socially respectable. It was a godsend for surgeons and patients alike, allowing for longer, more complex procedures without the patient screaming in agony. It was a profound and compassionate use of chemistry to alleviate suffering. But, as with so many of the era's chemical discoveries, there was a darker, more recreational side to the story. This is the quirky or fringe tidbit. Chloroform, in its raw form, was also a popular and widely available recreational drug. Unlike the communal ritualized use of opium or the medical clinical use of morphine, the use of chloroform as a recreational drug was often a quiet, solitary affair. It was incredibly easy to obtain, sold in small bottles in pharmacies and shops. You could buy it for a few pennies, no questions asked. The effects were powerful and quick. A few sniffs from a handkerchief would induce a state of light intoxication, a dreamy, detached feeling that could quickly spiral into unconsciousness. A joke might have been whispered about someone who was under the ether at a party, but the reality was often far more dangerous. Historians still argue whether the recreational use of chloroform was a direct result of its medical availability, or if it was also a reflection of a deeper societal search for chemical escape. It's likely a bit of both. The fact that it was used and endorsed by medical professionals gave it an air of respectability, and its easy availability made it a cheap and accessible form of intoxication. A young woman, feeling bored or listless in the confines of a restrictive social life, might steal a few drops from her mother's medicine cabinet. A student, overwhelmed by the demands of his studies, might use it to escape into a brief dream-filled stupor. It was a secret, personal indulgence, a quiet form of self-soothing that came with a very high price. You're a bored Victorian housewife, the afternoon stretching before you in an endless procession of sewing and social calls. You feel a familiar low-grade sense of anxiety. You remember the small brown bottle in the medicine cabinet. It's marked chloroform, and you've seen your husband use it to clean his surgical tools. You pour a few drops onto a handkerchief and hold it to your nose. The smell is strange at first, sweet and cloying. But then, a feeling of pleasant detachment washes over you. The room seems to tilt and sway, and the world outside the window fades away. You feel a brief but blissful sense of oblivion. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the immense danger in this era of unregulated pharmacology. The risks of recreational chloroform use were, of course, enormous. The line between a light buzz and an overdose was terrifyingly thin. A person could easily misjudge the dose and slip from a state of intoxication into a fatal unconsciousness. The danger was compounded by the fact that the use was so often solitary. There was no one there to stop you from taking too much, no one to rush you to a doctor. The death would be a quiet, private one, a tragic accident with no witnesses. The use of chloroform also created a strange paradox. On the one hand, it was a symbol of modern, compassionate medicine, a way to end the age of brutal, agonizing surgeries. On the other, it was a tool for a quiet, personal kind of self-destruction. The same bottle that a doctor might use to save a life could be used by a person to end one, either by accident or design. This dual nature is a fascinating reflection of the Victorian mindset, a deep faith in science and progress, but also a profound naivete about the unintended consequences of that progress. The story of chloroform is a reminder that the drugs of the Victorian era were not confined to one purpose or one social class. They were, like the era itself, complex and contradictory. They were tools for healing and for harm, for progress and for decay. Chloroform, with its brief and intoxicating allure, serves as a perfect example of this. It was a drug that promised a swift, painless escape from the physical and emotional pain of life, and in doing so, it became both a miracle and a menace. You have now seen how a drug's purpose can be entirely transformed by the hands in which it is held. You're a silent observer in a smoky, gaslit Parisian apartment. The walls are covered in half-finished canvases, and a low table is cluttered with brushes, tubes of paint and a half-empty glass of absinthe. A man with a tormented expression, his face pale and his eyes wide, is scribbling furiously in a notebook. You recognize him. He is a poet, a bohemian, a man of letters. He's using a drug not for medicine, not for escape, but for inspiration. He is one of the many artists and writers who saw drugs as a key to unlocking the creative soul. This is a profound mainstream historical fact. The connection between drug use and artistic creation was a powerful and often celebrated theme in the Victorian era. It was believed that substances like opium and absinthe could break down the barriers of the conscious mind and allow the user to access a deeper, more profound well of creativity. They were seen as tools for the artist, a way to transcend the mundane and enter a world of pure imagination. The Romantics, with their love of the sublime and the supernatural, were particularly drawn to this idea. Samuel Taylor Coleridge famously wrote his poem Kubla Khan after an opium-fueled dream, a testament to the drug's power to conjure strange and beautiful visions. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the deliberate cultivation of a drug-fueled genius persona. For many artists and writers, it wasn't enough to simply take the drug. They had to embody the tortured bohemian addict. They would write about their experiences, and their drug use would become part of their public identity, a sign of their dedication to their craft and their willingness to live on the edge. This created a powerful and alluring mythos around drug use. It wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of a deeper, more sensitive soul. A joke might be told about an artist who claimed to be painting with his soul, fueled by the green fairy, but in many ways that was exactly what they were trying to do. Historians still argue whether these artists were genuinely inspired by the drugs, or if the drugs simply lowered their inhibitions, allowing them to create in a way they wouldn't have otherwise. It's a debate that touches on the very nature of creativity. Was the genius in the bottle, or was it in the artist, and the bottle simply provided a shortcut? The reality is probably a mix of both. The drugs didn't magically create talent, but they certainly altered the perception of reality, and for many artists that alteration was a source of great inspiration. Imagine you're a struggling novelist staring at a blank page. The words won't come. You feel a sense of despair, a fear that you will never write anything of value. You remember a friend's description of the vivid, dreamlike state of opium. You acquire a small lump of the drug and prepare it in a quiet room. You lie on a couch and let the smoky sweetness fill your lungs. The world seems to recede, and a new one, a world of your own creation, begins to form behind your eyes. The characters in your story, who were once flat and lifeless, now speak to you. Their voices are clear and distinct. You feel a sudden manic desire to write. You grab your pen and notebook, and the words spill onto the page in a torrent. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the desperate and often tragic nature of this pursuit. The dark side of this artistic embrace of drugs was, of course, the addiction that followed. For every artist who found a moment of inspiration, there were countless others who simply lost themselves in a haze of chemical oblivion. The drugs that were meant to be a muse often became a master, a cruel and demanding one. The creative genius would be replaced by a hollowed-out addict, a person who was no longer capable of creating, only of consuming. The romantic myth of the tortured artist began to give way to the grim reality of a life destroyed by dependency. The culture of drug use among artists and writers also had a profound impact on the way drugs were perceived by the wider public. While the use of drugs by the working class was often seen as a sign of moral decay, the use of drugs by the artistic elite was often romanticised. It created a powerful but dangerous double standard. It was okay to be a gentleman with a habit, but not a working-class opium fiend. This distinction is a fascinating example of how class and social standing shaped the Victorian moral code. The story of the Victorian artist and his drugs is a powerful and cautionary tale. It shows how the search for inspiration can be both a creative and a destructive force. It is a story of a time when the line between a brilliant mind and a chemically addled one was a thin and blurry one. You have now seen how the quest for a new kind of consciousness led some to glory and others to ruin, all in the name of art. You are a fly on the wall in a working-class Victorian home, the air heavy with the smell of coal smoke and damp wool. A young mother sits by the fire rocking a small, fretful infant. The child has been crying for hours. Its wails a high-pitched, relentless sound that has frayed every nerve in her body. The mother, exhausted and at her wit's end, reaches for a small dark bottle on the mantelpiece. The label, worn and faded, reads, "Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup." This isn't a bottle for an adult's ailment. This is a product specifically and openly sold for infants and small children. Its purpose was to bring serenity to a child, and in doing so, to an entire household. This is a profoundly sad mainstream historical fact. Victorian parents unknowingly administered narcotics to their children through a variety of readily available and heavily marketed remedies. These soothing syrups, or cordials, were a staple in many households, especially among the working poor. The relentless demands of raising a family in an age without modern sanitation, medicine, or childcare were immense. A crying, colicky baby was not just a nuisance, it was a source of profound stress and a sign of potential illness. These syrups, often a mixture of opium or morphine, alcohol and sugar, were seen as a godsend. They would quiet the child, ease their pain, and allow the parents to get some much-needed sleep. The efficacy of these products was undeniable. They worked, and they worked fast. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the bizarre and tragic marketing of these products. Advertisements in newspapers and on the bottles themselves would often feature smiling, plump, and healthy-looking babies, along with glowing testimonials from grateful mothers. They promised to regulate the bowels, allay pain, and produce natural quiet sleep. The manufacturers played on the deep-seated desire of parents to protect and comfort their children, all while hiding the fact that their products contained powerful and addictive drugs. A joke in the era might have been about a child who was as quiet as a church mouse thanks to the syrup, but the truth was far from amusing. It was a dark, unspoken secret in countless homes, a tragedy hidden behind the bright, cheerful labels. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of these products was a result of genuine ignorance on the part of parents, or a desperate and often conscious decision born of immense hardship. It is likely a combination of both. The lack of proper labelling laws meant that a parent had no way of knowing the true contents of the bottle. They trusted the manufacturers and the glowing testimonials. But they were also operating in a world of profound desperation. When a child's cries were the only thing separating a mother from a few precious hours of sleep before a long day of back-breaking labour, the temptation to use a product that promised to quiet them must have been overwhelming. Imagine you are that mother, your eyes gritty with exhaustion. You give a spoonful of the sweet, dark syrup to your infant. The child, after a moment of protest, swallows it. Soon, its cries subside, its eyelids droop, and it falls into a deep, peaceful sleep. You can finally rest. But the next night, the child's cries are more insistent. It seems to crave the syrup. You give it more. A cycle begins. The child becomes dependent, and the parents, in their desperation, mistake the withdrawal symptoms for a worsening of the illness, thus giving more of the very substance that is causing the problem. You probably won't survive this journey without feeling a deep sense of sadness for both the parents and the children, who were trapped in a tragic loop of chemical dependency. The consequences of this practice were devastating. The dosages were often dangerously imprecise, and an overdose was a common and tragic occurrence. A parent might accidentally give too much, or a child might get hold of the bottle. The lack of proper medical knowledge meant that the long-term effects of this early exposure to narcotics were completely unknown. These children, if they survived, would have had their developing brains exposed to powerful mind-altering substances from an early age. The soothing syrups were not a cure, they were a dangerous crutch that masked the underlying problems and often created new ones. The story of Victorian child remedies is a powerful counterpoint to the more clinical narratives of adult drug use. It highlights the profound naivete and dangerous lack of regulation that pervaded the era. The drugs were not being used for recreation, or even just for medical necessity. They were being used as a form of social control, a way to impose a kind of false serenity on a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. It was a quiet, chemical solution to a loud social problem. The story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that are hidden in plain sight, with a smile and a promise of comfort. You're a modern observer looking at a series of old photographs. One shows a soot-stained factory worker, his face pale and haggard, a small paper-wrapped lump of opium clutched in his hand. The next shows a woman in a beautiful gown, her hair perfectly coiffed, a small silver-plated syringe resting on a velvet cushion. You've already glimpsed how drugs permeated every corner of Victorian society, but here you see it explicitly, the quiet, chemical thread that connected the lowest to the highest. Drug use in the Victorian era was a great equaliser, transcending social strata in a way that almost nothing else could. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Addiction was not confined to a single social class. The form it took, and the public's perception of it, however, was dramatically different. For the working poor, drug use was a matter of survival. A man who spent 12 hours a day in a factory or a mine might use opium to dull the incessant aches and pains of his body. A mother might use laudanum to quiet her screaming children, or to find a moment of peace from the relentless grind of poverty. For them, it was a cheap, effective, and readily available form of self-medication. Their addiction was often seen as a moral failing, a sign of a weak character and a lack of self-control. They were the opium fiends of the sensationalized press, the subjects of moralistic tracts that warned of the dangers of a life of vice. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the respectable addiction of the upper and middle classes. Unlike their working class counterparts, their drug use was often cloaked in a veil of medical legitimacy. A wealthy woman suffering from nerves or melancholy might have a physician prescribe her morphine injections. A man of letters might claim to be using cocaine to fuel his creative endeavours. They were not addicts in the pejorative sense of the word. They were simply invalids, suffering from a chronic medically sanctioned illness. The addiction was not seen as a moral failure, but as a tragic consequence of a medical treatment. A joke might be told about a society lady who needs her daily dose of laudanum to survive the strain of the season, but the underlying reality was a silent and often deadly dependency. Historians still argue whether the medical community's treatment of the upper classes was a result of a genuine belief in the efficacy of their prescriptions, or a more cynical catering to the demands of their wealthy clients. It's a complex debate. They were, in a way, complicit in creating a new kind of medicalised addiction. They were giving their patients what they wanted, a quick, effective fix for their ailments, without fully understanding the long-term consequences. The result was a class divide in addiction. One was a crime, a moral failure. The other was a sickness, a sad but understandable reality. Imagine you are a prosperous merchant, a man of standing in your community. You suffer from a persistent cough that no doctor seems to be able to cure. You discover a popular cough syrup that makes you feel better, a product that is sold in every chemist's shop. You start to take it regularly, and soon you find you can't get through the day without it. Your family and friends don't suspect a thing. They simply believe you're a man with a chronic cough, and the syrup is the only thing that helps. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the immense hypocrisy that permeated the era. The same drug that could ruin a poor family could be a quiet, private secret in a wealthy household. The social and economic impact of this was profound. While the poor man's addiction might lead to his ruin and his family's starvation, the wealthy man's addiction was often simply a private burden, a quiet secret. He could afford to pay the doctors, to buy the drugs, and to live a life that, on the surface, appeared completely normal. This class divide in drug use is a powerful reminder that the Victorian era was not a monolith. It was a world of profound contradictions, where the same behaviour could be viewed entirely differently depending on a person's social standing. The drugs were the same, the stories were not. The fact that so many drugs, opium, cocaine, morphine, chloroform, were so widely available and so deeply integrated into society meant that no one was truly safe. The poor were exposed to them through cheap, unregulated patent medicines. The rich were exposed to them through the prescriptions of their physicians. The result was a chemical landscape where every person, from the highest to the lowest, was a potential user and a potential addict. The Victorian era's drug problem was not a problem of a single class or a single vice. It was a societal problem, a quiet epidemic that was hidden in plain sight, in the medicine cabinet and the doctor's bag alike. You have now seen how the search for a chemical escape was a universal human need that transcended the strict social rules of the era. You're a listener in a crowded lecture hall, not a gaslit parlour. The year is now moving into the latter half of the Victorian era, and the quiet, private tragedy of drug use is beginning to emerge into the public eye. A doctor stands at a podium, a solemn expression on his face. He is not talking about the wonders of opium or the magic of morphine. He is talking about addiction, a word that is just beginning to take on its modern, terrifying meaning. He is describing a condition, a sickness, and he is a voice in a growing moral panic that would change the way society viewed drugs forever. This is a key mainstream historical fact. The widespread and unregulated use of drugs in the earlier part of the century led to a slow but steady increase in addiction, and by the 1870s and 1880s, the medical and social communities could no longer ignore it. The term addiction, or morphinism, was beginning to be used to describe the profound physical and psychological dependency that resulted from long-term use. Doctors who had once enthusiastically prescribed morphine were now seeing the devastating results firsthand. Patients who were in a constant state of a drug-induced haze, unable to function without their daily dose, their bodies wasting away. The problem had grown from an anecdotal curiosity to a full-blown public health crisis. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the bizarre and often cruel treatments that were developed to cure addiction. You might have heard of a sanitarium dedicated to treating the morphine habit. These places, often run by well-meaning but ill-informed doctors, would attempt to wean patients off the drug using a variety of strange and often painful methods. Some involved a cold turkey approach, locking the patient in a room and letting them suffer through the agony of withdrawal. Others involved a gradual tapering of the dose, often with a different drug like cocaine to help with the symptoms. The irony, of course, is that they were often simply substituting one addiction for another. A joke from the era might have been about a man who went to a sanitarium for his opium habit and came back with a cocaine one. The joke, however, was on the patient. Historians still argue whether the medical community's response to the rise of addiction was a genuine attempt to help patients, or a more cynical effort to control a social problem and regain authority over a populace that had been self-medicating for decades. It's a complex and layered debate. The reality is likely a mix of both. They saw a problem that was spiralling out of control, and they responded with the best tools and knowledge they had at the time, even if those tools were tragically inadequate. They were also motivated by a desire to bring the practice of medicine back into the realm of the licensed professional and out of the hands of the untrained public. Imagine you are a once respectable man, a civil servant who has fallen prey to the quiet allure of morphine, prescribed to you for a persistent ailment. Your family, concerned and ashamed, sends you to a sanitarium in the countryside. You're taken from your comfortable home and placed in a clinical room. The doctor tells you that you will be cured, that your addiction is a sickness that can be vanquished. But the process is a living hell. You are racked with tremors, cold sweats, and a bone-deep ache that nothing seems to be able to touch. You beg for a dose, just a small one, but you are denied. You feel a sense of betrayal, a profound and terrible loneliness. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the immense suffering that was caused by this newfound awareness. The moral panic around drug use was not just about the dangers of the drugs themselves, it was also about a deeper societal anxiety. The Industrial Revolution had changed the face of England, and the traditional social structures were beginning to fray. The middle class was growing, and with it came new anxieties about morality, health, and social order. The drug fiend became a symbol of everything that was wrong with modern life. A lack of self-control, a physical and moral decay, a surrender to a chemical master. The newspapers, with their lurid stories of ruined lives and families torn apart, fanned the flames of this panic. The result of this growing awareness was a powerful public demand for reform. The public, who had for so long bought their tonics and elixirs without a second thought, now wanted protection. They wanted regulation. They wanted the government to step in and put an end to the wild, unregulated market that had been a part of their lives for so long. The quiet, chemical revolution was now a loud, public debate. The era of open, casual drug use was coming to an end, and a new era of regulation and control was about to begin. The drugs were still there, of course, but their place in society was about to change dramatically, moving from the open shelf of the grocer to the back room of the pharmacy, and eventually to the dark, illegal corners of the city. You are now standing on the precipice of that great shift. You're a citizen of Victorian England, and you pick up a newspaper. The advertisements for patent medicines are still there, but now a new kind of story is beginning to emerge. One about a law, a piece of legislation that is meant to put an end to the wild, unregulated market that has been a part of your life for so long. The debate in Parliament is heated, a conflict between the forces of commerce and the forces of public safety. This is a moment of profound change, a shift from a culture of trust and self-medication to a culture of regulation and control. This is the Pharmacy Act of 1868, and it is the first tentative step toward a modern understanding of drug control. This is a key mainstream historical fact. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was the first major piece of legislation in the United Kingdom to regulate the sale of drugs. It was passed in response to a growing number of accidental poisonings and a rising public awareness of the dangers of unregulated substances. The Act created a clear distinction between a pharmacist and a general store owner. It required that anyone selling poisons and dangerous drugs be a qualified chemist or druggist, registered with the Pharmaceutical Society. The most important part of the Act was its establishment of a poison list, which included substances like arsenic, strychnine, and crucially opium and its derivatives. This meant that from now on these substances could no longer be sold by a grocer or a street vendor. They had to be sold by a registered professional who was required to keep a record of the sale. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the massive loophole that the Act created. While it regulated the sale of raw opium and its derivatives, it did not regulate the patent medicines that contained them. A bottle of laudanum could be sold by a qualified chemist, but a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup could still be sold at any general store, no questions asked. The manufacturers of these patent medicines argued quite successfully that their products were not poisons, but rather proprietary medicines with secret formulas. This clever bit of legal manoeuvring meant that the Wild West of patent medicines continued for decades, a testament to the power of a commercial lobby and the limitations of early attempts at regulation. A joke in the era might have been about a person who, if they couldn't get opium at the chemist, would just buy a dozen bottles of Dr. Jones's miracle cure at the grocer. Historians still argue whether the Pharmacy Act was a genuine attempt at public protection, or a more cynical move by the Pharmaceutical Society to create a monopoly for its members. The reality is likely a mix of both. The public was genuinely concerned about the dangers of poisoning, and the Society saw an opportunity to solidify its power and authority. The Act was a step in the right direction, but it was a small and incomplete one. It addressed the symptom, the sale of raw drugs, but not the cause, the public's demand for unregulated, powerful remedies. Imagine you are a shopkeeper, a respectable man who has for years sold everything from canned goods to lumps of opium. One day, a man in a crisp suit from the Pharmaceutical Society comes to your shop. He tells you that you can no longer sell the opium. You can sell the canned goods, the sugar, the flour, but not the opium. You're told that this is a matter of public safety. You shrug, a little annoyed, but you comply. You know that down the street at the chemist shop they will still sell the opium, but they will now have to write it down in a ledger. You also know that you will still sell your popular soothing syrup, because the law does not apply to it. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the immense and often absurd complexity of the law. The Act was a profound cultural shift. It created a new kind of social stigma around drug use. While laudanum was once a casual purchase, it was now a transaction that required a degree of formality. This move, however small, began the process of moving drug use from the realm of the everyday to the realm of the illicit. It was the first step on a long and winding road toward the modern drug laws that would follow. The drugs were still there, of course, but their public face was beginning to change. They were no longer a part of the open public conversation. They were a part of a quiet, private one, a transaction between a chemist and a customer, an item on a ledger. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was not the end of the Victorian drug problem, but it was the beginning of the end of the era of open, casual drug use. It was a sign that society was beginning to wake up to the unintended consequences of its love affair with chemistry. It was a recognition that a drug's power required a degree of control, and that control had to be exercised by a professional, not a grocer. The battle between public safety and personal freedom had begun, and it would be a battle that would define drug policy for centuries to come. You are now leaving the era of wild, unregulated drugs and entering a new world of quiet, bureaucratic control. You're in America now, in a pharmacy in Atlanta, Georgia. The year is 1886. A man named Doctor John Pemberton has just invented a new concoction, a syrupy liquid that he claims is a brain tonic and a medicinal beverage. He calls it Coca-Cola. It is an instant sensation, a sparkling, sweet drink that promises to cure headaches and relieve exhaustion. You, as a modern observer, know the story of this drink. You know that it is a cultural icon, a symbol of America. But what you might not know is its surprising and now infamous secret ingredient. This is a story about a Victorian drug that made its way into an iconic American beverage. This is a profound mainstream historical fact. Coca-Cola was originally a patent medicine that contained cocaine. Dr. Pemberton's original formula was a mixture of coca leaves, which contained cocaine, and cola nuts, which contained caffeine. The two substances were a potent combination, a perfect pick-me-up for a nation that was moving at a furious pace. The drink was marketed as a cure for a variety of ailments, including hysteria and melancholy. It was not sold as a simple soft drink, but as a health tonic, a respectable and effective way to restore your vigour. The fact that it was sold at soda fountains, which were seen as clean and wholesome places, gave it an air of respectability that was far removed from the back-alley opium dens of London. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the bizarre and now almost unbelievable marketing of the product. Advertisements for Coca-Cola in the late 19th century were not about a refreshing drink on a hot day. They were about its medicinal properties. The drink was sold as a solution to all the ills of modern life, from nervous exhaustion to general malaise. The ads were filled with glowing testimonials from satisfied customers who claimed that the drink had cured their headaches and given them a newfound energy. The fact that this energy was a result of a powerful stimulant was, of course, a fact that was not mentioned in the marketing. A joke might have been about a man who claimed to be a coke fiend, not for the sugar, but for the chemical buzz. Historians still argue whether the presence of cocaine in Coca-Cola was a deliberate attempt to add a powerful addictive substance to the product, or if it was simply a reflection of the era's medical understanding. It is likely a mix of both. Dr. Pemberton, like many others of his time, genuinely believed in the restorative properties of the coca leaf, but he also knew that the stimulant effect of the cocaine was a powerful selling point. The drink's success was not just a result of its taste, but of the way it made people feel, and that feeling was a result of a powerful and addictive drug. Imagine you are a working man, a clerk in a dusty office. You have a persistent headache and a feeling of profound fatigue. You walk into a soda fountain and ask for a glass of the new Coca-Cola. It is cold, sweet, and a little syrupy. You drink it down, and almost instantly you feel a change. The headache recedes, and a feeling of energy and focus washes over you. You feel alert and capable. You are ready to go back to your work, and you feel a sense of gratitude for this new brain tonic. You probably won't survive this journey without a sense of the immense naivete that was a part of this era. You are drinking a drug, and you have no idea. The story of cocaine in Coca-Cola is a fascinating microcosm of the Victorian era's relationship with drugs. It was a time of scientific progress and profound naivete. The same substance that was being used by doctors to cure patients and by artists to fuel their creativity was also being put in a soft drink for mass consumption. The line between medicine and recreation, and between a cure and a chemical crutch, was blurry at best. The fact that a product with a powerful and addictive drug in it could be sold so openly, so innocently, is a testament to the lack of regulation and the deep-seated trust that the public had in the products of the era. The story ends, of course, with the eventual removal of the cocaine from the drink. As the 20th century began, and the moral panic around cocaine grew, the company was forced to remove the powerful drug from its formula. The drink, however, kept the coca in its name, a quiet reminder of its potent past. The story of Coca-Cola's early years is a powerful reminder that the Victorian drug problem was not just a matter of hidden dens and secret addictions. It was a matter of open and public consumption, a problem that was so deeply integrated into the fabric of society that it was a part of something as innocent as a soft drink. The legacy of these drugs, you see, is still with us, in the names of our products and the very fabric of our culture. You're a time traveller looking back on the Victorian era, and you're no longer just an observer. You're a detective, trying to piece together a story. You've seen the public's love affair with opium and laudanum, the rise of morphine and the hypodermic syringe, the wild west of patent medicines, and the bizarre use of cocaine and chloroform. You've seen how drugs permeated every corner of society, from the highest to the lowest, from the sick to the simply bored. And now, as you look forward, you can see how this rich and strange history has shaped our modern world. The Victorian era was not just a time of top hats and steam engines. It was the crucible in which our modern drug culture was forged. This is a key mainstream historical fact. The Victorian approach to drug use laid the groundwork for our modern, legal and medical frameworks. The first tentative steps toward drug regulation, like the Pharmacy Act of 1868, were a direct response to the unchecked chaos of the era. The moral panic and the growing awareness of addiction led to a public demand for control, a demand that would eventually result in the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act in the United States in 1914 and the Dangerous Drugs Act in the United Kingdom in 1920. These laws, which for the first time criminalised and heavily regulated the sale and possession of narcotics, were a direct legacy of the Victorian drug problem. The quiet, personal use of drugs had become a public, legal issue. The quirky or fringe tidbit of this section is the bizarre legacy of some of these drugs. Think about heroin, which was first synthesized in 1874 and later marketed by the Bayer Company as a non-addictive morphine substitute for coughs and pain. The name heroin itself was derived from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic, a testament to the fact that it was seen as a powerful heroic drug. For a time, it was sold openly, a testament to how little the medical community had learned from its past mistakes with morphine and cocaine. The story of heroin is a perfect encapsulation of the Victorian mindset, a profound belief in the power of chemistry to solve all of life's problems, a belief that was so powerful it led them to make the same mistakes, over and over again. Historians still argue whether the Victorian era's laissez-faire approach to drugs was a result of a deep-seated naivete or a reflection of a society that was simply more comfortable with risk. It's likely a mix of both. They were living in an age of profound change, and they were willing to experiment with new technologies and new substances in a way that we, with our modern understanding of addiction and public health, would find reckless. They believed that science could solve everything, and they were willing to take risks in the name of progress. The Victorian drug culture, with its strange mix of hope and naivete, is a mirror that reflects our own relationship with technology and progress. We too are quick to embrace new technologies without fully understanding the long-term consequences. Imagine you are a person of today, looking at the world around you. You see a society that is grappling with an opioid crisis, a crisis that has its roots in the medical overprescription of powerful addictive painkillers. You see a society that is debating the legalization of cannabis, a substance that was once a common ingredient in many Victorian remedies. You see a society that is constantly seeking a chemical solution to its problems, from anxiety to insomnia. You probably won't survive this journey without realizing that the Victorians are not just a part of the past, they are a part of us. Their legacy is in our medicine cabinets, in our laws, and in our own approach to health and wellness. The long-term impact of the Victorian drug landscape is immeasurable. The era's unregulated patent medicine industry gave rise to a consumer protection movement that would eventually lead to the creation of agencies like the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. The medical community's tragic entanglement with morphine and cocaine led to a deeper and often more cynical understanding of addiction. The moral panics around opium and cocaine created a powerful and often misguided social stigma around drug use. The drugs were no longer seen as a simple part of life. They were seen as a moral evil, a sickness that needed to be eradicated. The Victorian era, you see, was the age of the great drug experiment. It was a time when society, with its immense faith in science and its profound naivete about human nature, opened the door to a world of powerful and intoxicating substances. The result was a profound and often tragic chemical revolution, a revolution that was fought in the quiet corners of every household and in the grand halls of Parliament. The legacy of that revolution is still with us, a quiet hum in the background of our modern world. We are in a very real sense the children of the Victorian era, a time that taught us that every solution in a bottle comes with a price. Now, as the gaslight fades and the fog of the city recedes, you can see the long arc of this story. You can see how the desire for a moment of peace, a respite from the pain of life, led a whole society down a path of quiet chemical servitude. You can see how the lessons of that era, the dangers of unregulated drugs and the profound human cost of addiction, are still being learned today. And with that, your journey through the Victorian night has come to an end.